Hey everybody, Coach Mark here, and today we're going to do a show report on my athlete Josh Laterre and his recent performance at the JURASSIC SHOWDOwn, where he took home first place. But before we get into that, a quick word from our corporate sponsor, literally me, Mark E. I offer one-to-one coaching, it's what I do full-time, and the odds are very good. I'd love to work with you. Also, make sure to find me over on Instagram as Coach Mark Estrabio. But with that being said, let's talk about JURASSIC SHOWDOwn. The show itself consisted of 5 events. The first one was an ascending Zercher pin squat, which is one I have not seen done in a show before, but honestly, I really like conceptually. The idea here is the athlete would come down, they'd add weight, come back up, just repeat till they couldn't get their repetition. Then it was an axial clean and press away for max reps, a max silver dollar deadlift using Wessel's rules, so 3 attempts, and if you miss, you can't go down. A max distance sandbag carry, and the idea here was it was just max distance, no time cut. And then last but not least was an ascending head-to-head sandbag load where everyone had to jump in at a certain weight, and they would just keep adding weight until you missed and you were out. Quick shout out to the promoter of JURASSIC SHOWDOwn. Thank you for not having a circus dumbbell in it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Josh and I first talked roughly 10 weeks back. We met on social media, just another one of those really cool people that lives inside my phone or computer. And we had a consultation call discussing suggestions what I would make if I were working with him leading into JURASSIC SHOWDOwn. A few of the key notes I made for him is based upon his really busy schedule as a steel mill worker. I felt that a 3 times a week split was probably going to be the winning move to help manage fatigue. Coupled with that was the idea of introducing deloads during competition prep. And the deloads were not going to be done via intensity, but more so via volume. That way he could still retain that sort of nervous system tonus where the heavy weights didn't suddenly shock him from a low load phase of his training. And then lastly, some skill work on his push press to help improve his rack endurance was something that I felt was a really good piece of low-hanging fruit. The ultimate thesis of the call was to get better. I suggested one of 2 things. He either needed to invest in a chemistry kit, which I couldn't help him with, or get more targeted training, which, what do you know, I could help him with. Now this is something I've talked about before, but when it comes to peaking for a strongman show, I'm a big believer that you essentially need to jam a square peg into a round hole, whereas in the off season you're trying to build the best possible square peg version of yourself. Competition inherently requires more specificity. As such, what we do in the off season is build a better you to better handle the rigors of peaking for the show. Normally in a situation such as Josh's, I would have reached for a 3 times a week full body split, but because the show was incredibly static by nature, I felt that something along the lines of a lower upper full body split would be a better solution. That way we could better lock in the focus on peak strength across the days. Now that being said, even with the idea of something like a lower upper full body split, we did integrate some adaptations, again, just to help manage fatigue across the week as well as intelligently program volume. For example, on his upper body day, we actually did a lot of loading work, and this synergizes really nicely here because the loading itself, there's not a big eccentric component, so it's not going to generate too much fatigue. Plus, he was already in his lifters, which most of you are going to use for loading, so it just made it a little easier to go from one thing to the other. And then as far as accessories go, we really biased towards static strength with bench variations using either a partial ROM to reduce shoulder fatigue as well as maximize tricep overload, or occasionally integrating in something like a narrower grip incline press for maximal transference to the overhead. We also would adjust the accessories and swap them out based upon feedback and stressor recovery, but we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through our event by event breakdown. Our first event was an ascending Zercher pin squat, and we used honestly a very basic progression here. Essentially every other week or so we would hit a heavy single alongside sets of 3 to 4 across, so it might be a single one week and then some back off triples, then maybe sets of 3 to 4 across one week, and then the next week we might hit another heavy single again. It was all just based upon his feedback and individual progression, but due to the nature of this show, I did not feel we needed to get a ton of volume in here. Our main focus was just getting the upper back and legs strong enough to handle the rigors of this event. We really emphasized his upper back in particular in movements such as snatch grip rows and shrugs being used as accessories. Additionally, the front carry was a bit of a natural synergist here. Now, one thing we did change out here is initially I'd opted for the Zercher Good Morning to be an accessory movement here, as I felt it would have really good carryover. As well, it would help with the front carry movement, and again, that upper back loading would also be beneficial for an elevated deadlift. But after a few weeks of negative feedback and just the way it was affecting his recovery, we wound up dropping it in favor of a more standard Good Morning. Another key accessory we used here was an SSB Hatfield squat just to help improve his leg drive. As far as a sample session goes, for example, we had him hit a single at 350 and then back off to 3 triples at 290. And you can see his result on screen right now. He topped out at 176 kilo or 388 pounds, good for second place on this event and netted him 9 points. Thus, at this point in the show, he had 9 points. The second event was the axle clean and press away, and what we did here is for the first couple weeks we actually did a lot of EMOM work just to make sure that his clean was quick, smooth, and efficient. Even though he's a very technically sound lifter, it's something I always like to do is make sure that the clean is not going to be an inhibitor or that you spend too much energy on it. In later phases, we emphasized rack position endurance as well as overall press conditioning. And then the blast press and neutral grip 45-degree incline were some key accessory movements here. We also did dabble with the log floor press for tricep overload. So one thing you'll notice here is on a lot of the pressing accessories, we opted for a neutral grip just to help reduce shoulder fatigue in light of all the rack position time that we had. As far as sample sessions go, in session A, it was something like an axle clean and press away for max quality reps, and then he would drop it, rest 30 seconds, re-clean, and go again. So essentially a 2 microset rest pause, and he would do 2 rounds of that. So in session A here, you'll see he did 9 plus 2 at 225, rested for a minute, and then went back and did 6 plus 3 at 225. Then came the incline press, and then we topped off with some windmills and IYT raises. And then in his second pressing session of the week, we did blast presses, which is a dead stop push press off of pins, so very concentric focused. I really like this variation for building timing on leg drive, as well as reducing leg and low back fatigue while still improving press performance, especially in a show like this where we had max front carries, deadlifts, and squats. We wanted to be mindful of systemic fatigue, so the blast press slotted in very nicely here. Then we followed that up with some log floor pressing as well as loo raises just to help develop the overall shoulder and keep things moving nicely. So you'll see here he got 4 reps at 255 pounds. This netted him a 3rd place finish and 8 points. Thus, at this phase of the show, he was at a 17-point subtotal. Our third event was the max silver dollar deadlift, and they used a squat bar on this one. So we were kind of playing back and forth, initially deciding, do we use an axle, do we use a power bar, and we opted for the power bar. This had a slightly odd elevation and setup, but that being said, it was obviously one of those things where low back and upper back, as well as just a little bit of leg, were going to be the key variables here. Additionally, the front carry plus squat training had tremendous transference to this deadlifting event. As far as how we trained for this, it was a relatively basic process where we used just a standard semi-linear peak. So for example session here, we did 2 triples at 650, then we did some good mornings, Hatfield squats, snatch grip pendlay rows, and pull-ups. Overall, training for this event was probably the least complicated one, just because all of the other events did bleed into it due to their specific demands, for lack of better words. And on this event, Josh was able to top out at a 766-pound deadlift, good for 2nd place, netting him 9 points. At this point in the show, subtotal, 26 points. Event number 4 was the Sandbag front carry here, and as I've alluded to throughout, this show had a lot of synergy in its events, which made it really simple to train for. In this situation, the Zercher and loading training obviously carried over. So we emphasized density here, getting his foot speed going. Because if you've ever done a max distance carry, it's one of those things where pacing yourself sounds really great on paper, but once fatigue sets in, it becomes a slog. So if you can get as much done and stay ahead of your fatigue before it shows up, you're going to get a better result. A lot of this was spent doing 80 to 100 foot runs. For a sample session, something such as accumulating max distance in under 10 minutes, aiming for 400 feet at 250 pounds. He logged this in 3 minutes, 48 seconds. So this was an earlier session, but it showed us that he had plenty of foot speed to spare. Now, as far as the result here, he accumulated 211 feet with that 315-pound bag. This was good for 3rd place, netting him 8 points. Subtotal at this point in the show was 34. The final event of the show was the ascending sandbag load, and this was definitely the one that I felt we had our eyes on the most. It was the one that I feel, obviously, he performed the best on. In terms of how we trained for it, again, everything had so much carryover. All we really needed to do early on was develop his skill and make sure he had a quick, snappy timing, which you'll see in the video he certainly does. We used a lot of time domain work as well, just to make sure that he wasn't burning up too much energy getting the bag into position so he could get it over the bar efficiently, especially with this being the last event of the show. So for example, early on in training, we did something such as a sandbag complex where he would pick it up, do 2 extensions, and then once over the bar. I do want to mention he is the only lifter that actually got the 380-pound bag in his division. So this got him first place and 10 points. Subtotal, 44 points. So ultimately, Josh had a very good performance. As you can see, he won it with 44 points accumulated. Second place had 39, and third place was 31.5 points. You'll notice he didn't win most of the events, but that's one of the big things with Strongman is understanding that every event is worth the same points. So rather than hyperfixating and spending all our energy on, say, winning the deadlift and then being cooked for the rest of the day, we were able to consistently hang out in the top 3 and then end it with a bang with that 380 sandbag. On screen now is a nice little... So here's a little snapshot of what a week of training looked like for Josh. So you'll see in day 1, it was the axle, rest, pause, press method. Then we did some incline press, sandbag work, windmills, IYT raises, and then a little arm-only air bike work. And the idea behind this was just to help build endurance in the delts to help with his rack position on the press away event. And then on day 2, we did our deadlift work and all the supplemental hinging work thereafter, as well as some vertical pulls and a little air bike work just to help push blood through the legs as well as keep his conditioning up. And then our final day of the week, we started with the Zercher pin squat. Then we moved into some blast presses, front carries, a log floor press to help overload the triceps, and then a little loo raise work for the shoulder health. Now, a lot of you might look at this and say that doesn't seem like very much. And the truth is, it's not. When it comes to peaking, it's not about how much you're doing, but about extracting the maximum benefit from everything you are doing. In the off season, you should be training with a higher baseline level of fatigue. Whereas when you're peaking, what you should be doing is narrowing your focus quite a bit. That way you can shed fatigue while also extracting the highest possible performance from yourself come competition day. So ultimately, the big beats for how we got Josh to be successful at this competition was embracing the idea that less can be more. Originally, he had thought about doing something like a 4-day split, and he himself even said he's the type to just kind of hammer away at competition load during the entire prep. Instead, we narrowed down his focus and slowly ramped him up, and this allowed him to shed fatigue throughout the entire prep phase. Working backwards from the competition demands is going to be a surefire way to get more out of your peaking cycle, because once you know what it is you need to be able to do, you can then fill in the necessary steps to be able to do it come competition day. But that's really all about I got for you folks today. Again, big congratulations to Josh. You absolutely killed it out there. I believe his next one is going to be the ugly sweater. I actually have quite a few people at that one, if memory serves me correctly. So you can look forward to a series of videos discussing that. That's all I got for you folks, though. You have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you.